Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Anne Boleyn, the enigmatic second wife of Henry VIII, forever changed the course of English history. Her story is one of love, ambition, and betrayal, set against the backdrop of a kingdom in turmoil and a king's relentless pursuit of power and legacy. Part 1: Anne's early life. Anne Boleyn's early life is cloaked in historical ambiguity, with discrepancies in the details of her birth and upbringing. Scholars generally agree she was born between 1501 and 1507, though the precise year remains debated. Her family, the Boleyns, were a prominent and ambitious gentry family, connected to noble and royal circles through strategic marriages. Anne's father, Thomas Boleyn, was an astute courtier and diplomat, serving under both Henry VII and Henry VIII. Her mother, Lady Elizabeth Howard, was part of one of England's most distinguished aristocratic families, further elevating Anne's social standing. Anne's early education prepared her for life at court, emphasizing decorum, wit, and linguistic proficiency. She likely spent her childhood at Blickling Hall in Norfolk or Hever Castle in Kent, both family properties. Her father's diplomatic career exposed her to the cultural sophistication of continental Europe. By her adolescence, Anne was sent to the Netherlands to serve Margaret of Austria, the regent of the Low Countries. Margaret, known for her progressive court and intellectual pursuits, was impressed by Anne's intelligence and charm. This formative experience shaped Anne's poise, confidence, and understanding of courtly etiquette. Anne's journey continued in France, where she served Queen Claude, wife of King Francis I. The French court was a hub of Renaissance culture and refinement, and Anne thrived in this environment. She absorbed the art of conversation, cultivated a taste for music and fashion, and gained fluency in French. These qualities later set her apart when she returned to England, bringing a cosmopolitan flair that intrigued the English court. Her years in France also exposed her to early reformist ideas, which subtly influenced her views on religion and governance. While in France, Anne became known for her graceful presence and sharp intellect. She formed relationships with influential figures, honing her skills in diplomacy and courtly intrigue. Her time abroad not only refined her demeanor, but also gave her a unique perspective on power and influence. Unlike many English women of her time, Anne had a direct experience of European politics and cultural exchange. This knowledge would later shape her interactions with Henry VIII and her role in the English court. Anne's return to England around 1522 marked the beginning of her ascent. Her education and experiences in Europe made her a standout among the ladies of the court. She entered the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon as a lady-in-waiting, a prestigious role that brought her into the king's orbit. At this time, Anne had no aspirations for the throne, focusing instead on establishing herself as a respected member of the court. However, her magnetic personality, sharp wit, and unique sense of style soon drew the attention of many, including King Henry VIII himself. Anne's early life was a tapestry of privilege, ambition, and preparation. Her exposure to the grandeur of European courts, combined with her natural intelligence and determination, created a foundation for her later influence. It was this background, steeped in culture and strategy, that positioned Anne to become one of the most pivotal figures in Tudor England. Her story was only just beginning. Part 2: Return to England. Anne Boleyn's return to England in 1522 marked a significant turning point in her life. After spending years immersed in the cultural sophistication of Europe, Anne brought with her a blend of refinement, intelligence, and charm that set her apart. Her arrival coincided with her father's rising prominence at court, further boosting her opportunities. Anne's first official role upon returning was as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon. This position placed her in close proximity to the royal family and introduced her to the intricate dynamics of Henry VIII's court. The Tudor court was a place of constant activity, teeming with ambition, rivalry, and political maneuvering. As a member of Queen Catherine's household, Anne witnessed firsthand the pressures of royal life and the challenges facing the Queen. Catherine, aging and unable to provide Henry with a male heir, was increasingly under scrutiny. Anne's position as a lady-in-waiting allowed her to study courtly politics, understanding how influence was wielded and alliances were formed. Her quick wit, intelligence, and stylish demeanor made her a favorite among courtiers, earning her both admirers and adversaries. Anne's early interactions at court were marked by modesty and discretion. Unlike her sister Mary Boleyn, who had a controversial affair with Henry VIII and avoided scandal and instead focused on cultivating her reputation, her time in France had taught her the value of restraint and the power of intellect. While many at court were captivated by her beauty and elegance, Anne's ambition remained carefully concealed. She demonstrated a keen ability to navigate social hierarchies, forming friendships and alliances with influential figures. During these years, Anne became a central figure in courtly entertainment, participating in masques, dances, and other royal festivities. Her French-influenced style and grace made her a trendsetter, admired by women and envied by men. Her distinctive wardrobe, often featuring bold colors and intricate designs, became a hallmark of her identity. These qualities helped her stand out in a court that valued appearances and presentation as much as substance. It was also during this time that Anne became engaged to Henry Percy, a nobleman from a powerful northern family. Their relationship, however, ended abruptly when Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, acting on orders from King Henry, intervened. The reasons behind the king's involvement remain unclear, but some speculate that Henry was already interested in Anne and wanted her unattached. Whatever the truth, the broken engagement caused Anne great distress and marked the beginning of her tumultuous relationship with the king. Anne's return to England was not just a physical homecoming but the beginning of her journey into the heart of Tudor politics. Her unique blend of European sophistication and English heritage made her a standout figure in a court driven by ambition and intrigue. Unbeknownst to Anne, her charm and intelligence were already attracting the attention of King Henry VIII, setting the stage for the seismic events to come. She was no longer merely a courtier. She was on the path to becoming a central player in one of England's most transformative periods. Anne's ability to adapt, her cultivated charisma, and her strategic positioning at court were key to her initial success. Yet, beneath her composed exterior lay an ambitious woman with dreams that reached far beyond the confines of courtly life. Her return marked the opening chapter of a story that would reshape England's monarchy and history forever. Part 3. The King's Obsession. Anne Boleyn's unique allure captivated King Henry VIII in a way no other woman had before. By the mid-1520s, Anne had become a prominent presence at court, embodying a rare combination of beauty, wit, and intelligence. Unlike many women who sought the king's favor, Anne did not actively pursue his attention. It was this restraint, coupled with her enigmatic charm, that intrigued Henry and ignited his obsession. At the time, Henry VIII was deeply dissatisfied with his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Despite years of devotion, Catherine had failed to provide a male heir, a failure Henry interpreted as a divine punishment for marrying his brother's widow. This dissatisfaction made him particularly susceptible to Anne's influence. Anne's rejection of Henry's initial advances only fueled his desire, as she refused to become his mistress. Unlike her sister Mary, who had succumbed to the king's affections and maintained her dignity, positioning herself as an unattainable prize, Anne's resistance to Henry's pursuit was strategic. Aware of the precariousness of being a royal mistress, she aimed higher. Her ambition was matched by her understanding of the court's dynamics and Henry's character. She knew that yielding too quickly would diminish her value in the king's eyes. Instead, she engaged Henry with a blend of flirtation and defiance, creating an emotional and intellectual bond that deepened his fascination. Her intelligence and wit challenged Henry, offering him a partner who could match his charisma and intellect. By 1526, Henry's infatuation with Anne had reached a fever pitch. He began showering her with gifts, writing passionate love letters, and confiding his deepest thoughts. These letters, preserved to this day, reveal the depth of Henry's obsession. In one, he described her as his heart's desire, expressing a longing that bordered on desperation. Henry's pursuit of Anne became a public spectacle, drawing the attention and gossip of the court. Anne, however, remained steadfast in her refusal to be anything less than his wife. Anne's insistence on marriage placed Henry in an unprecedented position. To make Anne his queen, he would need to annul his marriage to Catherine, a decision that carried enormous political and religious implications. The Pope's approval was essential for such a move, but Catherine's powerful nephew, Emperor Charles V, staunchly opposed it. This created a diplomatic crisis that would come to be known as the King's Great Matter. Anne's influence over Henry during this time was undeniable. She became his confidant and advisor, encouraging him to assert his authority over the church. Anne's reformist views aligned with Henry's growing frustration with papal interference, laying the groundwork for England's eventual break from Rome. Her ability to manipulate the king's emotions while subtly guiding his decisions demonstrated her political acumen. Henry's obsession with Anne was not merely physical, it was rooted in her refusal to conform to the expectations of a royal mistress. She presented herself as a partner capable of sharing in his ambitions and vision for England's future. This dynamic elevated Anne from the status of a courtier to a figure of immense influence. The king's obsession with Anne set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of English history. It was an obsession that defied convention, tested the limits of royal power, and ultimately redefined the monarchy. Anne's ability to captivate and challenge Henry transformed her into a force that could not be ignored. Her rise was inevitable, but it came with profound risks and consequences. Part 4. The Great Matter. Henry VIII's infatuation with Anne Boleyn not only consumed him emotionally, but also drove him to seek an annulment from his wife, Catherine of Aragon. This pursuit, known as the King's Great Matter, became a defining crisis of his reign. It was a quest that would challenge the authority of the Catholic Church, disrupt diplomatic relations, and lead to the eventual transformation of England's religious landscape. Henry's marriage to Catherine had initially been sanctioned by a special papal dispensation. Catherine was previously married to Henry's older brother, Arthur, who had died shortly after their wedding. Although the marriage was allegedly unconsummated, the union posed a canonical issue. In hindsight, Henry interpreted his failure to produce a male heir with Catherine as divine punishment for this union, citing Leviticus 20 verse 21, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing, they shall be childless." Initially, Henry sought a straightforward annulment, assuming his position as the King of England would ensure swift papal compliance. However, this was far from the case. Catherine vehemently opposed the annulment, asserting the legitimacy of their marriage and her role as queen. Additionally, her powerful nephew, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, held considerable sway over Pope Clement VII. Charles's influence ensured that the Pope delayed any decision, creating an insurmountable obstacle for Henry. As the papal court stalled, Henry's frustrations grew. And, eager to secure her position, supported Henry's defiance of Rome and proposed a bold alternative. Rather than relying on papal authority, she urged Henry to assert his sovereignty over the English Church. This idea resonated with Henry, who was already resentful of papal interference in English affairs. The seeds of the English Reformation were sown as Henry began to consider a break with Rome. By 1529, Henry's legal and theological arguments for an annulment had become entangled in international politics and church bureaucracy. Anne's role in these events was both influential and polarizing. She supported scholars and clerics who challenged papal authority, aligning herself with reformist ideals. Figures like Thomas Cranmer and Thomas Cromwell emerged as key allies, advocating for an independent English church. Anne's association with these reformists marked her as a champion of change, but it also intensified opposition from conservative factions within the court. The Great Matter dominated English politics for years, creating a rift among Henry's advisors. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry's most trusted statesman, initially tried to negotiate a solution with Rome. However, his failure to secure an annulment led to his dramatic fall from power. Wolsey's downfall further consolidated Anne's influence over Henry, as she filled the void left by the disgraced cardinal. Her proximity to the king enabled her to steer decisions, cementing her role as a driving force behind the push for reform. By 1533, Henry's patience had worn thin. Declaring himself head of the Church of England, he broke away from papal authority and annulled his marriage to Catherine through Archbishop Cranmer. This decisive action paved the way for Anne to become queen. The Great Matter was resolved, but its repercussions would reverberate for decades, fundamentally altering England's religious and political identity. Anne's involvement in the Great Matter showcased her intellect, ambition, and willingness to challenge established norms. Her role in persuading Henry to defy the Pope not only secured her place as queen but also reshaped England's future. However, the controversial nature of these events ensured that Anne would face both triumph and relentless scrutiny as the new queen. Part 5. Coronation and Triumph. Anne Boleyn's coronation as Queen of England in 1533 marked the pinnacle of her rise to power. After years of defying societal norms and enduring intense scrutiny, Anne finally achieved the status she had so fiercely pursued. Her coronation symbolized not only her triumph, but also the beginning of a new era for England. Anne's ascent was fraught with controversy. Her marriage to Henry VIII in January 1533, conducted in secret, raised eyebrows across Europe. Henry's previous marriage to Catherine of Aragon had been annulled by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer only months earlier, a decision still disputed by many. Despite this, Henry insisted on giving Anne the full honors of queenship, determined to showcase her as the rightful Queen of England. Anne, pregnant with what Henry believed to be the long-awaited male heir, was central to this display of legitimacy. The coronation ceremonies began in late May and culminated on June 1, 1533. London was transformed into a spectacle of grandeur, with elaborate pageantry designed to emphasize Anne's importance. The procession to the Tower of London, where monarchs traditionally prepared for their coronation, was a dazzling affair. Anne, dressed in gold and surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, traveled through streets adorned with tapestries, flowers, and cheering crowds. Her arrival at the Tower signified the magnitude of her new role. On the day of her coronation, Anne was anointed and crowned at Westminster Abbey. In a striking break from tradition, she was crowned with St. Edward's crown, typically reserved for reigning monarchs. This symbolic act underscored Henry's determination to elevate Anne to the highest status, presenting her as equal in stature to any king or queen before her. It was also a bold statement of defiance against those who questioned the legitimacy of her queenship. The celebrations extended over several days, featuring justs, banquets, and other festivities. These events were designed to showcase the strength and prosperity of Henry's reign, with and as its radiant centerpiece. However, the public's reaction to Anne's coronation was mixed. While some hailed her as a fresh and vibrant queen, others remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon and viewed Anne as a usurper. The deeply entrenched divide between supporters of Catherine and Anne foreshadowed the challenges Anne would face during her reign. Anne's triumph was deeply personal. After years of resisting Henry's advances, navigating courtly intrigue, and enduring relentless criticism, she had finally reached her goal. As queen, she had access to immense power and influence, with the ability to shape court policies and reward her supporters. Her pregnancy, widely believed to be a son, further solidified her position. Henry's confidence in her ability to deliver a male heir seemed unshakable at this time. Yet, even at the height of her triumph, Anne's position was precarious. Her rise to queenship had alienated many powerful figures, including staunch supporters of Catherine and conservative elements of the court. The annulment of Henry's first marriage and the break with Rome had created lasting resentment, both domestically and internationally. Anne's success depended not only on securing her husband's favor, but also on producing the male heir Henry so desperately sought. Anne's coronation was both a celebration of her achievements and a moment of immense pressure. While she basked in the glory of her new role, the weight of expectation loomed over her. She was no longer just the king's great love. She was a queen tasked with securing the Tudor dynasty's future. The coronation marked the zenith of Anne's rise, but it also set the stage for the trials that would follow. Part 6. Anne's early reign. Anne Boleyn's early reign as queen began with optimism and great expectations. With her marriage to Henry VIII solidified and her coronation celebrated with grandeur, Anne sought to assert herself as a powerful and capable queen. Her charm, intelligence, and political acumen made her a dynamic presence at court, but her position remained fraught with challenges. Anne's first priority as queen was to secure the Tudor dynasty by delivering a male heir. Her pregnancy in 1533 was a source of immense hope for Henry and the entire kingdom. Both Anne and Henry believed this child would fulfill the king's dream of a son to secure the succession. On September 7, 1533, Anne gave birth to a healthy child, but it was a girl. The child, Elizabeth, would later become one of England's greatest monarchs, but at the time, her birth was a disappointment. Henry's reaction was tempered, expressing confidence that a male heir would soon follow, but the pressure on and increased significantly. As queen, Anne displayed a sharp intellect and an active involvement in court politics. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, who had often embodied a more traditional and reserved role and sought to influence matters of state, she supported religious reform and aligned herself with figures like Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, who were pivotal in advancing the Reformation. Anne's patronage of scholars and reformists demonstrated her commitment to reshaping England's religious landscape, further solidifying her image as a modern and progressive queen. However, Anne's assertiveness earned her many enemies at court. Her rise to power had already alienated those loyal to Catherine of Aragon, and her outspoken nature made her a polarizing figure. Anne's quick temper and willingness to challenge others, including Henry, created tensions within her own household. Many courtiers viewed her as arrogant and ambitious, labeling her the Great Whore in whispered insults. This hostility underscored the fragility of Anne's position, even as she enjoyed the king's favor, and also faced significant challenges from international powers. Catherine of Aragon's nephew, Emperor Charles V, refused to recognize the annulment of her marriage to Henry, creating ongoing diplomatic tension. The Pope's excommunication of Henry in 1533 further isolated England from Catholic Europe, heightening the stakes for Anne's reign. As queen, Anne became a symbol of England's defiance of Rome, a role that carried both prestige and immense pressure. Despite these difficulties, Anne sought to cultivate her image as a benevolent and cultured queen. She commissioned lavish tapestries, jewelry, and books, promoting the image of a flourishing court under her influence, and also demonstrated compassion through her charitable works, distributing alms to the poor and supporting educational initiatives. These efforts aimed to win the loyalty and admiration of her subjects, though public opinion remained divided. Anne's early reign was a period of contradictions. On the one hand, she was celebrated as a vibrant and modern queen, actively shaping the direction of the court and the country. On the other hand, she was surrounded by enemies, burdened by the expectation of producing a male heir, and aware of the precariousness of her position. Her relationship with Henry, once marked by passion and mutual ambition, began to show signs of strain. The pressure to secure her role as queen weighed heavily on her, setting the stage for the trials and tribulations that would soon define her reign. Part 7. The Pressure Mounts. As Anne Boleyn's early reign progressed, the pressure to produce a male heir for Henry VIII grew overwhelming. Having given birth to Elizabeth, the future queen, Anne's position was increasingly precarious. Henry's desire for a son remained paramount, and Anne's failure to deliver one put a strain on their marriage and Anne's authority. The unrelenting pressure to fulfill Henry's dynastic ambitions weighed heavily on her, setting the stage for the deepening tensions that would follow. The birth of Elizabeth, while a significant event in its own right, was initially regarded as a disappointment. Henry, who had hoped for a male heir to secure the Tudor line, struggled to conceal his disappointment. Though he claimed to be satisfied, the absence of a son soon became a point of contention within the court. Anne's once strong position began to falter as she faced mounting criticism for failing to meet the king's most pressing expectation. This disappointment was compounded by the increasing strain on Anne's relationship with Henry. Though their love had been passionate and intense during their courtship, the foundation of their relationship began to erode as the years passed. Anne's fiery temperament, which had once intrigued Henry, became a source of frustration. As queen, Anne sought to maintain her political influence, but her assertiveness often clashed with Henry's increasingly volatile nature. He began to retreat into the company of his advisors and away from and further isolating her. Anne's failure to secure a male heir was not her only source of pressure. The political landscape at court had grown ever more hostile as factions began to form against her. Her rise to power had alienated many of the old guard, who remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon or had their own ambitions. Figures like Thomas More, a devout Catholic, saw Anne as a dangerous reformer, and their opposition only added to Anne's troubles. These growing factions were fueled by envy, resentment, and the perception that Anne had displaced Catherine, a queen who was still widely respected, especially among conservative courtiers, and also faced mounting opposition from the international arena. Her marriage to Henry and the subsequent break with Rome had isolated England from Catholic Europe. The Emperor Charles V's refusal to acknowledge Henry's marriage to and further complicated diplomatic relations. The lack of a male heir also left England vulnerable, as Anne's sonlessness raised questions about the stability of the Tudor dynasty. Amid this growing tension, Anne's rivals within the court began to mobilize against her. The Queen's enemies capitalized on her failure to produce a son, painting her as both ineffective and a threat to the future of the kingdom. Anne's efforts to foster reformist ideas within the Church also drew the ire of those who were loyal to the Pope and staunchly Catholic. Her public association with figures like Thomas Cromwell, who was viewed with disdain by traditionalists, further isolated Anne from powerful factions. By the early months of 1536, Anne's hold on the throne was beginning to slip. Henry, already restless and prone to fits of anger, began to show more interest in Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. Jane's quiet, demure nature contrasted sharply with Anne's fiery personality, and she quickly became the focus of Henry's affections. The seeds of Anne's downfall had been sown, and the pressures surrounding her would soon reach a breaking point. Anne's inability to secure the dynasty and her growing isolation at court were a direct threat to her position as queen. As the pressure mounted, her hopes of securing a lasting reign began to fade, and it was clear that her future as queen was now uncertain. Part 8. The Fall Begins. By 1536, Anne Boleyn's reign as queen was rapidly unraveling. The once great love affair between Anne and Henry VIII had soured, and her position at court had become increasingly vulnerable. After giving birth to Elizabeth, Anne failed to provide the male heir Henry desperately sought, and his affections had turned elsewhere. Henry's growing infatuation with Jane Seymour, Anne's quiet and demure lady-in-waiting, marked the beginning of Anne's fall from favor. The tensions within Anne and Henry's marriage had been building for some time. The pressure on Anne to produce a son was unbearable, and as her failure to do so became more apparent, Henry's dissatisfaction grew. His resentment was not just personal but deeply political. Without a male heir, the future of the Tudor dynasty seemed uncertain. The birth of Elizabeth, a daughter, was not enough to secure Anne's position, and rumors of Henry's growing affection for Jane Seymour began to circulate through the court. Anne's enemies, already numerous, seized on her weakening position. Conservative factions, including those loyal to the Catholic cause, had long viewed her as a dangerous influence, an upstart queen whose very marriage had caused a rift between England and Rome. Her support for the Protestant Reformation, her dismissal of traditional Catholic practices, and her involvement in the break with Rome had already made her a target. Anne's role in supporting the reformist movement, along with her outspoken personality, alienated many powerful figures at court. The political fallout from Anne's reign was substantial. With powerful enemies like Thomas More, who had been executed in 1535 for refusing to recognize Henry as head of the Church of England, Anne's survival was increasingly uncertain. These enemies began to gather momentum, accusing her of various crimes, from incest to witchcraft, and their accusations would soon form the basis of the charges against her. Anne's enemies in the court, led by figures like Thomas Cromwell, who had once been her ally, now turned against her. Amidst these growing pressures, Anne's situation became perilous. The king's dissatisfaction with her was no secret, and his growing affection for Jane Seymour further eroded Anne's position. As Henry's desire for a son persisted, he began to distance himself from and rumors of his affair with Jane gained traction. And once a political power broker, was now a queen besieged by scandal and accusations. The court, sensing Henry's shifting affections, began to turn on her, isolating her from her former allies. Anne's downfall began with her arrest in May 1536. She was charged with treason, adultery, and incest, crimes that were fabricated by those seeking to eliminate her. The charges were likely the result of court intrigues, fueled by the king's disillusionment and the machinations of Thomas Cromwell, who sought to rid the court of and pave the way for Jane Seymour to become queen. Anne's trial, held before a hand-picked jury, was a travesty of justice, as the evidence against her was flimsy and based on dubious confessions. On May 19, 1536, Anne was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. Her death was a dramatic and tragic end to a life that had once held such promise. Anne had been a woman of immense ambition, intelligence, and passion, but she was also a victim of the brutal politics of Henry VIII's court. Her fall from grace was swift, and her execution marked the culmination of a political and personal collapse that had been years in the making. Anne's execution marked the end of her reign as queen and the conclusion of her tumultuous marriage to Henry. Her daughter, Elizabeth, would go on to become one of the greatest monarchs in English history, but for Anne, her legacy would be forever marred by her tragic end. Part 9. Aftermath and Legacy. The execution of Anne Boleyn on May 19, 1536, marked a dramatic and tragic conclusion to a life that had once been full of promise and ambition. Her death reverberated throughout England, leaving a legacy that was as complex as the woman herself. To many, Anne's fall was an example of the ruthless nature of Henry VIII's court, where power and ambition were often the price of survival. Yet her death also laid the groundwork for one of the most remarkable reigns in English history, that of her daughter, Elizabeth I. In the immediate aftermath of Anne's execution, Henry VIII wasted little time in moving on from his second wife. Just days after Anne's death, Henry married Jane Seymour, the woman who had been the object of his affections during Anne's final years. Anne's fall had been swift, and Henry's shift in loyalties was just as rapid, further highlighting the fickle nature of court politics and the vulnerability of any ruler's consort. Anne's supporters, who had once celebrated her rise to power, now found themselves in dangerous positions. The political turmoil of the time meant that any association with and could be seen as treasonous. Thomas Cromwell, who had once been Anne's ally and had helped orchestrate her marriage to Henry, became the architect of her downfall, using the charges against her as leverage to rid the court of her influence. Even the noble families who had supported Anne's rise found themselves divided, as the power vacuum left by her execution created new opportunities for ambition within the court. Yet, Anne's legacy lived on through her daughter, Elizabeth. While Anne had failed to secure the Tudor dynasty through a male heir, her daughter would go on to become one of the most celebrated monarchs in English history. Elizabeth I, born just 3 years before Anne's death, would reign for 45 years, ushering in the Elizabethan era, a period of immense cultural, political, and military achievement. Despite the tragic end to Anne's life, it was her daughter who would ultimately fulfill her mother's ambitions for a strong and prosperous England. In the centuries that followed, Anne's legacy became the subject of fascination and reinterpretation. To some, she was a tragic figure, a woman who had been the victim of political intrigue, courtly machinations, and an unforgiving monarch. To others, she was a symbol of female ambition and resilience, a woman who defied the conventions of her time to claim power in a male-dominated world. Scholars and historians have long debated Anne's role in the English Reformation, with some viewing her as a key figure in advancing Protestantism, while others argue that her influence on religious change has been overstated. Anne's support for religious reform was certainly important, but it was the broader political context of Henry's break from Rome that shaped the religious landscape of England. Nevertheless, Anne's personal involvement in promoting the ideas of reformers like Thomas Cranmer and her patronage of Protestant figures helped to create the environment that would ultimately lead to the establishment of the Church of England. For many, Anne's life and death embody the tragic nature of court politics during the Tudor period. She rose from humble beginnings to the pinnacle of power, only to be undone by the very forces that had brought her to prominence. Her downfall serves as a reminder of the fragile nature of power in the Tudor court, where favor could turn as quickly as it was granted. While Anne's life was cut short, her impact on history, particularly through the reign of Elizabeth I, remains enduring. Part 10. Anne's influence on Elizabeth I. Anne Boleyn's tragic death did not mark the end of her legacy, especially when it came to her daughter, Elizabeth I. Though Elizabeth was just a child when her mother was executed, the influence of and on her daughter's reign would prove to be profound and lasting. Elizabeth's formative years, shaped by her mother's ambitions and ideals, played a critical role in the monarch she would eventually become. Elizabeth's position as the daughter of a queen who had been condemned to death was complicated and fraught with political implications. The young Elizabeth was declared illegitimate after Anne's execution, as Henry VIII had quickly moved on to marry Jane Seymour. Despite this, Anne's daughter inherited her mother's indomitable will and her intelligence, qualities that would shape Elizabeth's reign when she ascended to the throne in 1558. From a young age, Elizabeth was taught to be politically astute, a skill she would carry with her throughout her life. and had been a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of the Tudor court with wit, charm, and a sharp understanding of power dynamics. These qualities, instilled in Elizabeth from an early age, would prove invaluable as the young princess matured into a queen capable of commanding respect from both her court and the broader European powers. Despite her early years being marked by a degree of instability, Elizabeth grew up with a deep understanding of the political ramifications of royal life. Anne's downfall had shown her the consequences of being a woman in a court dominated by men, where power was fragile and loyalty could easily be betrayed. Elizabeth would often reflect on the precariousness of Anne's rise and fall, using it to temper her own decisions once she became queen. Anne's influence was particularly evident in Elizabeth's early political alliances. Just as Anne had supported the Reformation and sought to distance England from the influence of Rome, Elizabeth would continue her mother's legacy by establishing the Church of England as the state religion. Elizabeth's religious policies were a reflection of Anne's progressive views on religion, even if the young queen's actions were often more cautious and pragmatic. Anne's support for Protestant reformers like Thomas Cranmer helped lay the groundwork for a Protestant England under Elizabeth, despite the challenges she faced from Catholic opposition. In terms of personality, Anne's ambition and strong-willed nature resonated with Elizabeth, who was known for her intelligence, independence, and diplomatic prowess. Anne's tragic fall was a reminder to Elizabeth of the risks of overstepping her power, but also of the need to retain influence in a court fraught with competing factions. Elizabeth learned the importance of political maneuvering and cultivating alliances, skills her mother had mastered but ultimately could not use to her own advantage. Anne's presence in Elizabeth's life extended beyond political and personal influence. It also shaped the queen's image as a ruler. Elizabeth, having experienced the precariousness of royal life firsthand, presented herself as a monarch above the intrigue and ambition that had marred her mother's reign. This image of stability, strength, and grace became a hallmark of Elizabeth's reign, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had characterized Anne's downfall. Though Anne's reign had been short and fraught with peril, her legacy lived on through her daughter. Elizabeth I would go on to become one of England's most iconic and revered monarchs, and much of the resilience and political savvy that defined her reign could be traced back to the lessons she inherited from her mother. Anne may have been executed, but her vision for a powerful, independent England was realized through her daughter's remarkable reign. Part 11. Anne Boleyn's cultural legacy. Anne Boleyn's legacy was not confined to the political and religious spheres. Her influence also extended deeply into the cultural fabric of England during and after her time as queen. As the second wife of Henry VIII, she played a significant role in the cultural and intellectual shifts of the early 16th century. While her reign was short, Anne's presence in court catalyzed changes that would resonate throughout English society for generations. One of Anne's most significant contributions to English culture was her patronage of the arts and education. At a time when the Renaissance was beginning to shape intellectual thought in Europe, Anne was a strong proponent of the humanist movement. She promoted the study of classical literature, the arts and sciences, and was known for her sophisticated taste and support for emerging artists and scholars. Anne's court was a hub of intellectual and artistic activity, and her influence as a patron of the arts set her apart from many other queens of the period. Anne's personal love for music, literature, and the arts was reflected in her relationships with leading figures of the time. She was an admirer of the works of Erasmus, the famous Dutch humanist, and she championed the study of Greek and Latin literature. Anne's support for the works of scholars such as Thomas More, despite his eventual opposition to her, helped to cultivate a rich intellectual atmosphere at court. Her patronage of painters, poets, and musicians encouraged the flourishing of English Renaissance culture, a period that would produce the works of playwrights like Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare. The Queen also helped to shape the role of women at court, albeit in a way that would eventually have tragic consequences for her personal life. Anne's boldness in asserting her independence was both admired and criticized, and it made her a figure who challenged traditional notions of a woman's role in society. Anne's intelligence, education, and wit helped to elevate her above the traditional role of a queen consort, as she actively participated in the intellectual and political life of her time. Her legacy as a symbol of female ambition and empowerment would influence future generations of women, especially those seeking to navigate the complex dynamics of royal and political life. Elizabeth I, her daughter, would later embody many of the qualities that Anne had exemplified. intellectual, strong-willed, and fiercely independent. Anne's story, tragic as it was, became an enduring lesson in the complexities of female power, ambition, and survival in a male-dominated world. On the cultural stage, Anne Boleyn also left an imprint through the legacy of her daughter, Elizabeth I, whose reign was characterized by a cultural renaissance that would become known as the Elizabethan era. This period saw the flowering of English literature, the arts, and exploration, and much of the cultural development during Elizabeth's reign can be traced back to the intellectual climate fostered by Anne's influence at court. Anne's patronage of the arts and her promotion of Renaissance ideals helped to set the stage for the cultural achievements that marked Elizabeth's rule. Though Anne's reign was brief, the cultural shifts she fostered during her time as queen played a significant role in shaping the future of English culture. Her legacy, therefore, extends far beyond the political and religious spheres, influencing the intellectual and artistic life of England for generations to come. In her own time, Anne was both a patron and a symbol of cultural change, and her influence continued to resonate long after her death. Part 12. Anne Boleyn in popular culture. The figure of Anne Boleyn has endured for centuries, becoming one of the most captivating and controversial figures in English history. Her life, her rise to power, and her tragic downfall have inspired countless works of art, literature, and film, making her a symbol of both triumph and tragedy. Anne's story has transcended the boundaries of history, evolving into a cultural icon who continues to capture the imagination of people around the world. From the moment of her execution, Anne became the subject of public fascination. Her fall from grace and the dramatic circumstances surrounding her trial and death left an indelible mark on the English collective consciousness. For centuries, she was portrayed as a victim of political machinations, a woman whose ambition and strength were overshadowed by her tragic fate. As a result, Anne Boleyn became a symbol of both the dangers and possibilities of female power in a male-dominated world. One of the most significant ways Anne's story has lived on is through literature. Writers from the 16th century onward have drawn on her life as a subject of both historical and fictional narrative. Her tragic end has been used to explore themes of power, betrayal, love, and the complexities of royal life. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Anne's story was revisited in novels such as Philippa Gregory's The Other Boleyn Girl, which portrayed her as a victim of courtly intrigue and Henry's obsession with securing a male heir. The popularity of Gregory's book and its subsequent adaptation into a film sparked renewed interest in Anne's life and legacy, introducing her to a new generation of readers and viewers. Anne's story has also inspired numerous films, television series, and documentaries, each offering a unique interpretation of her life. In these portrayals, Anne is often depicted as a woman who was ahead of her time, intelligent, ambitious, and politically savvy, yet ultimately undone by the ruthlessness of the Tudor court. Films such as Anne of the Thousand Days, 1969, and more recent portrayals in TV series like The Tudors, 2007 to 2010, have contributed to the mythology surrounding Anne Boleyn. These adaptations often highlight her complexity as both a queen and a woman struggling to navigate the treacherous world of Tudor politics. In addition to literary and cinematic portrayals, Anne Boleyn has been the subject of plays, operas, and musical compositions. Her life has been the inspiration for numerous theatrical productions, where her tragic fall is depicted as both a political and personal tragedy. The opera Anna Bolena by Gaetano Donizetti, for example, explores Anne's downfall through a musical lens, emphasizing her emotional and psychological struggle as she faces betrayal and abandonment by those she trusted. In the realm of historical reenactments and tours, Anne's story is also brought to life for modern audiences. Historical sites such as the Tower of London, where Anne was executed, attract thousands of visitors each year, many of whom are drawn by her fascinating story. Living history events and educational programs have contributed to the continuing interest in Anne Boleyn, as they allow people to engage with the past in a more immersive way. Despite the many interpretations of her life, Anne Boleyn remains a figure who continues to fascinate because of her complexity and enduring mystique. Her personal and political struggles, her role in the English Reformation, and her tragic death have all contributed to the mythology surrounding her character. Anne's legacy in popular culture has ensured that she remains a central figure in discussions of English history, female power, and the machinations of the Tudor court. Part 13. Anne Boleyn's death, and the myth of her execution. The execution of Anne Boleyn on May 19, 1536, remains one of the most dramatic and controversial events in English history. Her death, ordered by her husband, Henry VIII, marked the culmination of a series of political and personal betrayals that would shape not only her legacy, but also the future of the Tudor dynasty. The circumstances surrounding Anne's execution have been shrouded in myth and speculation, with many historians questioning the charges against her and the fairness of her trial. Anne's fall from grace was swift, and her execution seemed almost inevitable after a series of courtly intrigues were set in motion against her. Her enemies, led by Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, sought to discredit her and remove her from power, believing that her influence over Henry had become too great. Cromwell orchestrated the charges of adultery, incest, and treason, which were brought against Anne in a highly irregular and politically motivated trial. The accusations were flimsy, and many contemporary observers, including those within the court, believed that Anne was the victim of a conspiracy to eliminate her as a political threat. The trial, which was held in May 1536, was a farce by modern standards, with little regard for justice or due process. Anne was not given a proper defense, and the evidence against her was based largely on the testimony of her alleged lovers, most of whom had already been executed before the trial even began. In the end, Anne was found guilty of adultery, incest, and plotting to kill the king, charges that were widely believed to be fabricated to secure her downfall. Henry VIII, whose infatuation with Anne had turned to resentment, accepted the verdict without question, sealing her fate. On the morning of her execution, Anne was led to the scaffold at the Tower of London, where she met her death with a remarkable degree of composure. Accounts of her final moments vary, but most agree that she spoke confidently and with dignity, addressing the crowd and expressing her innocence until the very end. Some reports claim that she forgave her accusers, while others suggest that she acknowledged her mistakes but remained firm in her belief that she had been wrongfully accused. Regardless of the specifics, Anne's composure in the face of death only added to the myth surrounding her execution. The execution itself has become a symbol of injustice, with many viewing Anne's death as a politically motivated act rather than the consequence of any real crime. Some historians believe that Anne was sacrificed to appease those who wanted a male heir for Henry VIII, and that her death was part of a larger effort to consolidate the king's power. The fact that Anne's execution was carried out with a French swordsman, rather than the traditional axe, has fueled further speculation about the nature of her death, adding to the mystique of her final moments. In the centuries following Anne's death, her execution has been romanticized and mythologized in literature, film, and popular culture. The image of the innocent queen led to the scaffold, calm and dignified in the face of death, has become one of the most enduring images of Tudor history. Yet, as with many aspects of Anne's life, the truth of her death is obscured by the passage of time and the layers of myth that have been built around her story. Ultimately, Anne's execution was a turning point in English history, not only because it marked the end of her life, but also because it set the stage for the future of the Tudor dynasty. Though her death removed her from the political scene, her legacy would endure through her daughter, Elizabeth I, who would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs. Part 14. Anne Boleyn's Legacy Through History. The legacy of Anne Boleyn continues to echo through history, marked by her impact on both the political and cultural landscape of England and her lasting influence on the monarchy. Though her life was cut short, the consequences of her marriage to Henry VIII and the events surrounding her execution would shape English history for centuries. Anne's legacy is especially significant in the reign of her daughter, Elizabeth I, but it extends far beyond that to affect the course of the English Reformation, the role of women in power, and even the perception of monarchy itself. Anne's marriage to Henry VIII set in motion a series of events that led to the English Reformation, a pivotal shift in the religious and political structure of England. When Anne became queen, she was at the center of one of the most important religious and political transformations in English history, the break from the Roman Catholic Church. Anne's support for Protestant reformers and her role in facilitating Henry's divorce from Catherine of Aragon, which was a key step toward England's break with Rome, helped establish her as a figure central to the Reformation movement in England. Though Anne's death removed her from the political scene, the Reformation continued under her daughter's rule, culminating in the establishment of the Church of England under Elizabeth I. Anne's influence, therefore, lived on through Elizabeth, who embraced the Protestant faith and worked to consolidate the reforms her mother had championed. In this way, Anne's political vision, which was rooted in her desire to bring change to England's religious structure, was realized posthumously through her daughter's reign. Anne's tragic end also contributed to the evolving role of women in power, particularly within the context of the monarchy. Anne was a queen who was not content with simply being a consort. She sought to exercise influence over matters of state, religion, and diplomacy. Though this ambition ultimately led to her downfall, it also paved the way for future female monarchs like Elizabeth, who would use her power with extraordinary skill and independence. Anne's life and her death challenged traditional gender roles, proving that women, even in the context of a male-dominated society, could wield significant political power and ambition. In the centuries following her death, Anne's legacy was interpreted in many ways, often reflecting the evolving views of monarchy and gender in English society. For much of history, Anne was remembered primarily as the tragic queen who fell victim to courtly intrigue and the whims of her husband, Henry VIII. In the 19th and 20th centuries, however, a more nuanced portrayal of Anne emerged, one that highlighted her intelligence, her political acumen, and her agency as a queen and woman in a male-dominated court. Anne's cultural legacy also contributed to the enduring fascination with the Tudor dynasty, a period that remains a source of intrigue for historians, novelists, and filmmakers alike. Her story has been retold in numerous books, films, and plays, each offering a different interpretation of her character and her tragic fate. From being portrayed as a victim of royal politics to a symbol of female empowerment, Anne's legacy has become a rich and multifaceted narrative that continues to captivate audiences worldwide. In the end, Anne Boleyn's legacy is one that continues to inspire and provoke debate, with her life remaining a powerful symbol of ambition, power, and the price of survival in a ruthless world. Through her daughter, her religious influence, and the cultural impact of her story, Anne's legacy has endured as one of the most significant in English history. Part 15: Anne Boleyn's Enduring Myth and Influence. Anne Boleyn's story, from her meteoric rise to her tragic fall, has given rise to a powerful myth that endures through the centuries. Her life, her trial, and her execution have become symbols of ambition, betrayal, and the perilous world of royal politics, and they continue to inspire a wide array of interpretations in modern culture. The image of Anne Boleyn, both as a victim and a bold political figure, has been woven into the fabric of English history and remains a subject of fascination and myth. One of the central elements of the Anne Boleyn myth is her role as a woman who defied the traditional expectations of her time. Her rise to power, through her marriage to Henry VIII, was a remarkable achievement for a woman in the 16th century, a period when women were often seen as little more than pawns in political games. Anne's ambition, intelligence, and determination allowed her to ascend to the highest position in the land, but it also made her a target for those at court who were threatened by her influence. The myths surrounding Anne often focus on her relationship with Henry VIII and the events leading to her execution. Many people, both in Anne's time and throughout history, believe that her tragic end was a result of her failure to give Henry the male heir he so desperately wanted. While her execution was, in many ways, the result of political machinations, it has also been interpreted as a reflection of Anne's role in the king's desperate pursuit of an heir and his growing dissatisfaction with her. Another element of the myth surrounding Anne is the mystery that still surrounds her trial and execution. Was she truly guilty of the charges brought against her, or was she the victim of a political conspiracy? The evidence against her was shaky at best, and many historians have suggested that Anne's trial was a carefully orchestrated effort to remove her from the throne and secure the future of Henry's dynasty. This uncertainty has fueled the myth of Anne as an innocent victim, wrongfully accused and executed for crimes she did not commit. The lasting power of Anne Boleyn's myth is also evident in her portrayal in popular culture. From historical novels to films, TV series, and even operas, Anne's life and death have been explored in countless ways. Each retelling of her story offers a new perspective, whether it is focusing on her as a tragic figure, an ambitious queen, or a symbol of female power and resilience. Her image has become an enduring symbol of both the dangers of court politics and the strength of a woman who dared to defy the odds. Moreover, Anne Boleyn's myth is intertwined with the legacy of her daughter, Elizabeth I. The political and religious changes initiated by Anne's marriage to Henry VIII laid the groundwork for Elizabeth's reign, and many have seen Elizabeth as the fulfillment of Anne's vision for England. The myth of Anne as the mother of Elizabeth, the queen who would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs, has cemented her place in history as more than just a tragic queen. She is also seen as a key figure in the shaping of the English Renaissance. In the centuries since her death, Anne Boleyn has remained a central figure in the study of the Tudor period and an icon of enduring intrigue. Her story has transcended the confines of history to become a living myth, one that speaks to themes of power, ambition, love, betrayal, and the fate of those who seek to challenge the status quo. Anne's life continues to resonate, not just as a historical account, but as a cultural and symbolic touchstone, forever remembered as a woman who left an indelible mark on English history. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.